Jake Roos, we have a commit. Georgia has landed four-star wideout Tyler Williams 2.0, if you will, after the other Tyler Williams who signed with Georgia in 2023 has moved on to Minnesota. But this is another four-star prospect, Georgia's third four-star wideout of the 2025 class, and it comes on the heels of a very surprising C.J. Wiley commitment yesterday. Initial thoughts as a guy that's in the recruiting trenches every day.
Good way to bounce back for Georgia is what I would say to this. It's not an apples to apples comparison between C.J. Wiley and Tyler Williams, and I don't mean to imply that. I hope people won't take it that way. But I do think Tyler Williams is a very talented player in his own right. So I don't think that there's anything to be upset with about this pickup. I think that people need to go turn the film on Tyler Williams and see what Georgia saw in this kid. I think that you and I have talked about this at length. I'm sure we will get to it in this segment. But I think when you go watch this kid play, you understand the vision that Georgia has here. And, certainly I think it was a great way for Georgia to offset some bad / unexpected news on the wide receiver front. To have to turn to a guy like this, I don't think that that's a bad thing for the Bulldogs at all. Kudos to James Coley, man. He carried a relationship over from South Carolina here, relied on those Florida ties. And quite frankly, I think has done a really nice job in building out this 2025 class when it comes to pass catchers.
I don't necessarily know. Use some verbiage in there that I don't necessarily think is the case in this situation. You said turn to. It really seemed to me like, Georgia had this guy on campus in April. They went and visited him during the spring evaluation period. They got a lot of data on this kid. They got a lot of eyeballs on this kid. It seemed like he was a guy, and I feel comfortable saying this, he's a guy that had a spot in this class. Had Georgia landed C.J. Wiley yesterday, I still think Tyler Williams is committing to Georgia today.
Yeah, I use that more so in terms of like, let's refocus the bad news, right?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily like, we're substituting a guy in. I agree with you. I think that he had a spot in this class. I just think the timing of it is very convenient for the Bulldogs to kind of take some of the sting off of what happened yesterday with C.J. Wiley.
Yeah, and obviously the C.J. Wiley thing's not over, and we may talk about that a little bit later on in this video. But ultimately, I really, really like this kid. I watched this video. I think I flipped it on maybe 3 weeks ago, and I first started kind of watching it. And he comes from like a not so pass heavy offense at the high school level, which so many of them are. But you look at his numbers, and there's like an 11.5 100-meter time, which is not great. Really not good at all, but it looks to be his only competitive 100-meter time as a track and field athlete. You also look at the fact that Lab McConkey ran 11.23, not great. Dylan Bell 11.6, 11.3, not great. So those, you kind of, take take that with a grain of salt a little bit. But I watched this film, man, and I see a guy that separates, he pulls away, he can go up and get it, and he plays big. He has from what I understand, a very good high jump, like I think 6.5 feet on the high jump, which is really solid. It's not like state championship caliber, but it's really competitive. And I don't know, man, I see a really physical football player here. He's changed schools. He was at Sumner, I believe, this past year. He's going to be at Armwood, which has had a ton of athletes.
Powerhouse.
That's a powerhouse. Athletes. I was looking actually. Armwood hasn't put a ton of guys in the NFL, but produces a ton of high school prospects who go on to play at the college level. So that's something to look out for there as well. But I don't know. I watch this film and I see a guy that makes a lot of plays. He makes a lot of plays on special teams. He makes plays with the ball in his hands, and he makes plays when he's covered. And I think those are all things that can be helpful for a Georgia offense.
Yeah, I think too, you mentioned that 100-meter time, and I think that, that is what it is. It's recorded and it's out there, and people are going to take it at whatever face value they will. I think you watch this film and he plays a lot quicker than that time would suggest. I think that you see him turn on the jets on some of these dudes and just absolutely get away from people. I think he's about to do it right. Well, he didn't even have to run very hard on that one. Those guys just fell down trying to get near him. But like you said, I think that, into Armwood, probably a little more on in terms of passing. I think he only had 26 receptions this past year. Made it 22 yards per reception, though. So that's a pretty good average. I think he had like 15, 16 touchdowns, something like that. So he's a guy who makes the most of his opportunities at Sumner. And I think that, that's something that, you come down to the evals, you watch the tape, you see that, yeah, maybe the numbers aren't huge, but he's making the most of those opportunities when he gets there. At that clip, I remember you and I discussing yesterday, you said he just stole that cornerback's soul. And
He did.
He absolutely did. That kid was just hanging his head on the film session when they turned that one on Sunday. But I think too, the thing about Tyler Williams that I've enjoyed in getting to know him and talk to him, just a real level-headed kid, man. Really thoughtful in his answers. Very took a very level-headed approach, I thought, to this whole thing, and just appreciates what Georgia's about. One of the more unique things that I've had a recruit say to me is something he said following his official visit this past weekend. He said, I felt like they were trying to make us not like the school. And he said, they were telling us all the tough things up front about it, what was going to be hard, what we were going to struggle with, what it was going to be like. He said, that made me like it even more because I want the truth. I want to know what it's going to be like. And I also want to be challenged and I want to be pushed. And so those are always encouraging things. I mean, to hear from a guy, and I think especially a wide receiver, this is a kid who I really think people, they're just not as familiar with the names because it's not Trevor Smith and it's not CJ Wiley. And that's who we've had the focus on for the majority of this class. But I think once people get to know this kid a little bit more, see this film, and that gets out there a little bit more, I think Georgia fans can really wrap their head around where James Coley was going with this thing and can appreciate this as being a really nice pickup, a great addition to the class. And I think, what's interesting is that they've got a lot of these guys, I feel like, who are kind of similarly body typed. You got Williams, you got Talon Taylor now, you got Thomas Blackshear. Those guys are separated by a couple inches at most amongst that group, but all really well built, all physical guys, all guys with speed. So kudos to James Coley, man. I think that he's done a really nice job fleshing this class out, and certainly they're going to continue to do that moving forward. I don't think we've seen the last of high school wide receiver recruiting, even with Tyler Williams in the boat.
3-sport athlete as well. Plays basketball, runs track, competes in the jumps and track. Also, obviously, plays football. Listen, I don't want to gloss over this. Like, hey, this is the guy that's going to make people forget about CJ Wiley. Again, Georgia's going to continue to recruit CJ Wiley for a reason because Wiley's a big, fast, physical wideout. Okay, but I think Tyler Williams is a part of this class, whether CJ Wiley commits to Georgia yesterday or not. Rusty reported earlier on, maybe late last week, maybe earlier this week, that the vibe was starting to kind of pick up that Georgia would take 5 wide receivers if it was the right 5. I think this guy was going to be in the right 5 for that. And listen, if Georgia's able to get Landon Roldan to go with Tyler Williams, that gives Georgia 4. They're going to keep recruiting CJ Wiley until the very end. I mean, they're just going to keep, CJ Wiley told our Jeremy Johnson yesterday, I'm still open to get, being recruited. I'm still probably going to be back at Georgia. So, again, I think this is still a piece to the puzzle that Georgia wanted to be a piece to the puzzle, whether it missed on that big piece yesterday or not. And that's an important, I think, note. It's not just a footnote in this whole thing.
Yeah, and I think, too, another thing that you got to consider here is Georgia did a really nice job with this eval, in my opinion, because it wasn't like you were competing with Florida State. You weren't competing with Florida. This kid really kind of latched onto the schools that latched onto him early. And so Miami was in the mix, UCF, Syracuse. He was a guy who was not looking necessarily for the Johnny-come-lately, I guess, when it came to his recruitment. He wanted some familiarity. I believe he visited back in January, too, if I'm not mistaken, in Athens. So it's been kind of a long-term relationship there. They've continued to build it. He was supposed to OV to Florida. He didn't end up doing that. Syracuse, obviously, France up there. So, Georgia knows what they're up against with something like that. But with Miami, that's a school that people get a little, nervous when that name gets floated around as being in the mix for a kid. They had him on campus for an official visit. I believe it was the first official visit, if I'm not mistaken. I believe he came in on that late May trip window. But, Georgia, I think, did a really nice early call here and, kind of wins out for a guy that probably has more upside than people are giving him credit for.
And, listen, the rankings process isn't over yet. Charles Power, our guy over here at On 3, he's an On 300 prospect for us, just outside, I believe, the top 200, if I'm not mistaken. And a top, a guy that's kind of ranked highly in the state of Florida. A guy, I think he's a top 25 player, maybe in the state of Florida, which, for Charles, and that's a big deal there too. I'm interested to see where the rest of the industry goes with him and kind of what we see as far as his ranking, because again, like I said, I like him a lot. I know it obviously seems like Georgia likes him a lot. A lot of other schools, whether he was a take for them at the end or not, Alabama came in with an offer. Plenty of other SEC schools came in with an offer, and Georgia has done a tremendous job with these evaluations, making sure it hits on the guys like Dylan Bell and some guys like A.D. Mitchell and Lab McConkey. And this kid, if I had to make a comparison, to me, he looks a lot like kind of Marcus Rosenby-Jack Saint at the same stage, just in terms of size, but maybe with a little more twitch and explosiveness.
Yeah, I think that's a good comparison. I think the quickness is really the separator for sure. Marcus was not ever going to burn you. This kid looks like he could. And I think, though, that you see some of those traits crossover. One thing you see doing on just a ton, and I would like to see more of, and I'm sure Georgia has, is block. You see a lot more of the highlight stuff. He's not out there just bullying guys around, but clearly, look, he knows what he's getting into if he's coming to Georgia, and he knows that he's going to be asked to do that. So I don't think it's something that he's going to shy away from. It's just something that we don't see a ton of on the film. But I like that comparison. I believe, too, you said Dylan Bell at one point to some degree, maybe a little bit of that in his game. They like him on special teams. That tells you he's got some slipperiness. He's got some elusiveness. But really, just overall, I think that he's a kid that Georgia, like you said, was locked in on, felt good about throughout the process, and did a nice job of really closing on over the course of that last official visit weekend. And, as I've said countless times in this video, I think James Coley has done a very, very nice job with this wide receiver class for 2025. You look around, that's 3 4-star guys now, still in the mix for, a couple of others at least. You're looking at, they'll continue to recruit CJ Wiley. Landon Roldan is still out there. I would assume if Jarrell Boulder gave him a call and said, hey, I'm looking to maybe loop back around, they might be willing to entertain that. Travis Smith is a guy who's not totally off of the board. We don't necessarily feel strong about the chances, but it's not like Georgia's running him away. So they've got a lot of options out there when it comes to the wide receiver spot. Philip Wright was a guy who officially visited this past weekend. I think that Rusty said something to the effect of he would be a take as well. So, they've got a lot of options out there, a lot of meat still on the bone when it comes to the wide receiver spot, and they've already done a really nice job recruiting it.
Absolutely. Commitment number 16, Georgia ranks number 2 in the 2025 class behind Ohio State. And first, obviously, that gives them the top class in the SEC. And the Bulldogs just keep plugging right along. Summer's going to continue to be busy, and we'll have it covered for you over at DawgsHQ.